All right, welcome to another episode of Fan to Fan Combat Podcast slash YouTube channel. We are here with our special guest today, Westin Wilson. Westin is a MMA fighter out of Simpsonville, South Carolina, currently fighting with, and correct me if I'm wrong, Upstate Karate.
Correct.
And
Yep.
excellent, Weston. We just want to thank you for joining us today. Just to get things started off, we want to ask you about your background in MMA a little bit. You can talk to us about the roots of the journey that led you to where you are now.
Yeah. So I got started when I was a kid in high school. Um, I was wrestling at a really high level, looking to wrestle in college, and then we moved to Brazil and there was no wrestling. So my dad was like, "Hey, if you want, I'll let you do MMA and jiu-jitsu and kickboxing and everything else. Like just go do the research, find a gym in Brazil and we'll sign you up." So that was the start. And so I got to Brazil, I found a gym, I got started, and I was the young American kid who spoke no Portuguese, and I'd show up every day, get my butt kicked, and kept coming back, and hooked from there on. So I've been doing it for about 17 years now.
That's awesome. I think that's really interesting. You going to Brazil and starting your MMA journey there. And I was just wondering, how do you think you'd be the same fighter you are today if you didn't move to Brazil and if you just stayed in the US? I guess how would things differ if that were the case?
Um, I wanted to do it before I moved to Brazil. I don't know how different it would be. I think, um, I I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. I probably would have stayed in Brazil an extra year. Um, I don't know. It's hard to say. You know, if stylistically, I don't think stylistically I'd be a different fighter.
Uh-huh.
Um, because I always leaned more towards the grappling arts, but I still had okay striking. Um, and I would have been at BYU anyway. So and that's like BYU is kind of where my real MMA journey started. Like Brazil was the preliminary chapter. Utah at BYU was like the start.
So I
Gotcha.
kind of want to know a little bit more about that then, right? Because for our viewers who don't know, BYU is school out in Utah, repping the Y. I'm actually a BYU student myself, but there's not a predominant MMA culture in Provo. There is
So there used
outliers.
to be a big one. There used to be
Okay,
a big one.
yeah. Can you tell me about that?
So at the top of State Street, there used to be an academy called the Pit Elevated,
Okay.
and it was like the number one MMA gym in the state. We put a guy every year in the Ultimate Fighter. I think our gym had 9 UFC vets at one time, all from Utah, and we'd get guys coming in to train with us. Like Kelvin Gastelum was going to join our team, so we were kind of one of the early onset like mega schools. We were kind of sister schools with Team Alpha Male, so a lot of the Team Alpha Male guys would come up and do a little bit of their training camp with us. And then we had the Pit out of California that would like those guys would come, so like John Hackelman and Chuck Liddell, and they would work with Court McGee. So we had a huge scene. And so when I got to BYU, I started training with them. And well, really what it was I was dumb enough to like just take a fight. And then I was like, okay, I got to find a gym to train. So I was like, what's the best gym in the area? That is. So I kind of just went like right into the fire with training with these top guys. And once again, just get my butt kicked. And I took a fight on 8-week notice against a 3-0 kid, and I ended up beating him, and that was kind of the start. And then that was where I started kind of getting in with those guys, and really what kind of set me up on my path. And stylistically, like one of the amateur coaches at the Pit Elevated, he was a karate guy, and he always be like, hey, you need to start like trying to adopt more of a karate style in your striking. I think it would do you very well. And so it's funny because I'm always like known as a karate style striker in my fights, and I've like trained with some of the top karate guys in the world, and I'm still a white belt in karate. I actually just started doing traditional karate this year with my dad. So
Okay, cool. So yeah, I wanted to ask you about that karate style, and this kind of leads us into you're training now at Upstate Karate over in South Carolina. I was just wondering what led you there from BYU all the way across the country to South Carolina and training at that, awesome gym over there.
So, it's funny. So I've kind of always just, MMA has always been like the thing, I have a really good career, and I make really good money doing what I do, developing software and everything like that. But I've always kind of let, the Lord kind of lead my path. And so that's kind of what, like, so I left Utah because my wife wanted to move out to Dallas. And so that's where I kind of started really grappling again. And like out there, my striking was so much better than everybody's in the Dallas area. And then I just knew that we had to move. And I ended up getting hired on to a company in California. And California is kind of where everything came together. I was going out to Greenville. When I moved to California, I was going out to Simpsonville, Greenville, South Carolina for work, like 2-3 times a year. And that's where I synced up with Coach Thompson and Wonder Boy. Coach Thompson's Wonder Boy's dad. So Coach T and I really hit it off. And Wonder Boy's, just nice to everybody. But Coach T and I really hit it off. And so we would, over the next like 2-3 years, we would text each other, and I'd just say, hey man, I won my fight. Like, I'm going to come out in a couple of weeks. Is it cool if I train with you again? Yada, yada, yada. And so we really started developing that relationship while I was out in California those 2 years. But in that time, I was trained with Raymond Daniels, who, if you don't know who Raymond is, back in the day, that guy's got some of like the craziest knockouts in kickboxing, one of the fastest strikers on the planet. And so he's got that karate background. So I was learning my striking from him. And then my jiu-jitsu was under a guy named Jiva Santana, who they call him the arm collector. He got 14 straight armbar victories in Bellator back in the day. Like, the dude's just top notch, and so that's kind of where my style started really coming together. And then I got the offer to move out and head up, my department in Greenville, South Carolina. So I was like, okay, great. Yeah. So we moved 3 years ago. And I've been with Coach T ever since, trained with Wonder Boy, and we got some other really good young guys that, everybody's about to, know very soon. And so yeah, it's been a wild ride, but we're definitely where we're supposed to be. And it's funny, my parents actually, they came out and visited last year, and they built a house right down the street from us, and so they live here now. And so it's been awesome. And my MMA career really started taking off because I had that time in California that kind of refined my style, and then I was able to come here with a coach who understood everything about my style and just really honed in on my strengths and my weaknesses, and really built it up. And the same time I moved out here, we got a really high level wrestling coach, so I was able to kind of get back to my wrestling roots too. So Coach Davini, he heads our wrestling at the school, and so we were, everything kind of just came together, and I've been on a pretty great run over the last 3 years at 8-2 with all first round finishes. unfortunately, the losses were first round finishes too. But you know, it shows that I'm willing to just stand and or you know, die on my shield, however you want to put it. Like I'm not looking to go the distance and you know, letting a judge decide the fate of the fight.
Yeah. And I guess if you were to explain because you talked about developing your style, if you were to explain your style to maybe a novice fan, how would you explain the way you fight? Because it sounds like balance is something that you've really tried to achieve as you've developed as a fighter. But how would you describe your style?
So it's funny. On Wonder Boy's podcast, we were talking one time, and we were like, he and I are like, we're kind of into the nerd culture a little bit, and he always wears a Hufflepuff shirt, and I have like Slytherin socks, and you know, I've got like a Slytherin shirt as well, and so one day we were talking about like how our Harry Potter house kind of lends to our style of fighting, and then like we rated a bunch of other UFC fighters, and you know, based on their fight style, what Harry Potter house they'd be in. We sorted like all different fighters. But so I'm a Slytherin, so I'm an opportunist. Like my whole style is I'm looking, you know, for an opportunity in there. So if you shoot on me, I'm going to look for an opportunity and use your wrestling against me. If you know, you're going to stand and you're a jiu-jitsu guy, like I'm gonna stand and strike, and I'm going to try to stay on the outside, and very long, very awkward timing, very awkward strikes that people don't see with, you know, that karate background. And so, you know, I'm like, I tease everybody at the school because I'm like the Walmart brand of Wonder Boy. This is what I, you know, joke around, because I'm not as smooth as Wonder Boy, and I never will be as smooth as Wonder Boy, but we do a lot of the same stuff. But mine's just like, you know, a cheaper version. Mine's you know, bag cereal and he's box cereal. But like at the end of the day, sometimes you can't tell the difference.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually watched that episode of Wonder Boy's podcast, and that was an excellent segment talking about the fighters in their Harry Potter house. And I'm going to ask you a Harry Potter question, but we'll save that towards the end. But while we're on the topic of Wonder Boy, I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the Kevin Holland fight that he had recently, because in my opinion, I think that was up there for fight of the year this last year. And just watching that as a friend of Wonder Boy, what were your thoughts watching that? Because incredible performance by both of them.
So it's funny, when I was in Dallas, I used to train with Kevin Holland. Okay. And so like leading up to the fight, I was like, hey, you know, we had a really good strategy going into it, and the strategy was just, so Wonder Boy kicks so hard, but sometimes he doesn't, you know, like, he's so nice, he doesn't want to like kick people his hardest. And so it's like, Holland's got a really good right hand, he's timing it really well, and so like the whole coaching staff, it was, you know, just kick his arms, just defang the snake, just kick his arms as hard as you can. And that's what he did. He was just whipping those kicks, and then I think he you know, Holland got tired of blocking with his arm, and it snuck through the body in that fourth round. And it was a brilliant fight. I was nervous in the first round, and then the second and third, I was like, all right, we got it. It's ours. It's in the bag. Like, Wonder Boy's doing what Wonder Boy does. And you couldn't have asked for a better comeback off of those two losses, with the Bilal Muhammad fight and the Gilbert Burns fight. You know, it was 1-1 going into the third, and Wonder Boy came out really great in the third, and people forget that, because the last half of the third round, Gilbert got him to the ground and held him, but the first half of the third round was actually Wonder Boy's. He wobbled him, he, you know, hurt Gilbert, and then Gilbert took him to the ground and held him there. So honestly, the Gilbert fight, if you take it again, I think Wonder Boy can beat Burns if they were to rematch, because especially over a 5-round fight, I think over a 5-round fight, it leans more to Wonder Boy's favor. So
yeah. So were you involved in his training camp then, in terms of his preparation? Where you were part of the gym?
Yeah, I don't really, you know, Coach Wonderboy, I leave that to the head coach. I coach a lot of our amateur guys and some of our low level pros, and I teach a lot of the jujitsu classes for our MMA guys. But with Wonderboy, I stick like strictly to the teammate role. But if I know something about a fighter, I'll let the coaches know and say, hey, this is what he does, and I think this might be a really good strategy. Use it if you want. Like when he fought Jeff Neal, I knew Jeff Neal pretty well as well, back in my time in Dallas, and so I pointed out Neal fights on a rhythm of a 1, 2, 3, go, 1, 2, 3, go. So I pointed that out with the footwork, and Wonderboy was able to capitalize on that as well. But I mean, these are things that like Coach T's got such a keen eye, and he's been like an OG in combat sports for, I mean, he was doing MMA before it was even a legalized sport. They're going to pick that up anyways. But I try to give him the look of whoever he's fighting. So like with Bilal Muhammad, like I stood orthodox, and I don't grapple like Bilal, but striking, like I was able to mimic his striking style. And so that's more my role in Wonderboy's camps is more of just the teammate. I don't try to play coach, and him and I, like, we're close, like we'll feed ideas off each other all the time. Like now that I'm taking traditional karate, I've been like trying to incorporate like some of the traditional karate moves that would never happen in an MMA fight into like MMA fights, with different blocks and hand traps and things like that. And so I was playing around with sparring Wednesday. We were playing around with like one of the karate moves in the adult karate class, and it was actually working. And so he and I were just playing around with it, like when we were sparring some of our amateur guys. It was just, we just spitball ideas, like different setups, and that's what's super fun. And having a teammate like that, like that's what's really cool. And then in fights, we're able to like reproduce some of that stuff. And that's when people are like, oh, whoa, that's amazing. We've never seen something like that. And it's because, we get to play around in the lab together.
Yeah, I think that's an aspect that I think gets overlooked a lot of times, because ultimately when it's the fight, there's only two guys in the arena or in the octagon, right? But I don't think people understand the effort that goes in from coaches and from sparring partners and from different teammates putting in their opinions. Can you talk about how you've seen that benefit in your own career as you've prepared in fight camps?
Yeah, I think like it's an important principle in life in general. Like the people you surround yourself with are ultimately going to be the determined factor whether you're successful or unsuccessful, and not necessarily like win or lose. Like you can be successful and still lose a fight, but we're super successful in that fight, and you can be a failure and win a fight as well. And I've had instances of both, and that was the biggest thing coming out here. I really learned was it's extremely important who you have in your circle, and that trust that you have with each other. Because if you don't, it's not going to necessarily take off. And that's what's really important at the karate school is we have a very good tight knit culture, and Coach T won't allow a bad culture. If there's somebody who is becoming toxic or cancerous to the team, they get cut out. And I've been at, let's go back to the Pit Elevated, and that's what happened. We had all these superstars and prima donnas and people who want to do things their way, and we had different fractions that cut off, or excuse me, factions that cut off and did their own thing, and then ultimately the school failed, and you guys see the empty building on State Street when you pass it. Like it's right there by it's no longer the airsoft gun store, but it's right there at the top of State Street, right on the border of Orem and Provo. Or yeah, I mean, just right before University. You guys know where it's at.
Yeah.
But you know, I think it's really important who you surround yourself with. And if you have somebody who's not contributing to the cause, as hard as it is, and they might be a friend, sometimes you have to have that conversation and tell them, hey, you either got to like contribute, or I can't have you part of it.
For sure, for sure. And it definitely seems like you have the right team around you. And I actually wanted to kind of transition into some of your previous fights. And I wanted to talk specifically about, I believe it's your most recent MMA fight, the Mike Wilson fight that happened, I think it was November 5th of this last year. And watching that fight, I watched it a couple times. It's up on YouTube. And just the grappling in that fight was phenomenal to watch. Kellen and I are no experts when it comes to grappling. We're just fans. But kind of walk us through that, because it looks like you were pretty close to having him in an armbar at one point. You almost had him in a rear naked choke. He had you in a heel hook, and ultimately you submitted him with the guillotine. But walk us through that fight. How close were you on the armbar, and I guess what were your thoughts on it?
So I had a teammate who fought on that card previous, and he lost. And so we're in the back in the locker room, and I know I'm the main event, and Coach T hates losing. And so he's like pep talking me, and he's like, you got to go in there. He's like, none of this, you know, dancing around, being lackadaisical like you'd like to do. He's like, you need to just come forward, just throw heavy shots, you know, smoke them with a few, you know, heavy hands, a few left hands, and yada, yada, yada. So I'm like, okay. He's like, just bite down your mouthpiece, you'll be fine. And like 2 fights prior to that, I fought Teruto Ishihara. What people don't know is I actually broke my toe in the fight, and then I got like slowed down, and then he broke my leg, and then I couldn't really move, and I got quote knocked out. It was more of a TKO. If you went back and watched that, but yeah, so like that was always like, you know, like, oh, do I have a chin anymore? That was the first time in like 30 fights that I've been knocked out. And I was like, do I have a chin anymore? Do I have a chin? And so that was like Coach T's way of telling me, like, hey, you need to go in there and you need to basically show that you still have a chin, and you'll be fine. And so then when we got to the ground, he was really slippery. And my jiu-jitsu style, I like to just attack. Like, I don't want you to have a breath. So I've got like a whole, and this came from Jiva, like I've got a whole slew of submissions that just go together. Like I call them like peanut butter and jelly submissions. So I'll go, you know, arm bars and guillotines and kimuras, like all of that, like all fit really well together, or at least in my style of jiu-jitsu, it fits really well together. And so when I can go to the ground, it doesn't matter if I'm on my back, if I'm on top, like I'm going to just start looking and hunting for submissions. And I've been caught by doing this style as well, but I'm so refined now that I don't get caught as much doing it, because I understand, you know, principles. And like I said, I've been putting the pieces together over the last 17 years. And so, yeah, with the Mike Wilson fight, it was great because like we wanted to stand with him, but then I don't know what caused me to go to the ground, because he was a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, and he's pretty respectable, like in the jiu-jitsu community around here. He's won quite a few local tournaments. But I knew that there was stuff that nobody in this region has seen. And the way that I finish a guillotine, people don't know. And so I knew if I could just get around his neck, it would be done. So the armbar was more of a way to like set everything up. When he went to that heel hook, I actually like when guys go to a heel hook, because in MMA, I can like punch and then it opens the neck. So that's ultimately what gave me the neck. I thought I was gonna get close with that rear naked choke, but he was very slippery. Like it was the first time I grappled somebody that was really, really slick, and not like slick in like jujitsu terms, but like his body was just very slimy. But he was a good kid, and man, he took some heavy shots. But yeah, there was some, like, I surprised myself going back and watching it, because there's at one point where he was trying to roll through and I kicked off the cage, and that's how I finished the guillotine, was kicking off the cage like that, which was kind of cool. And I think just kind of came natural to me. And so, yeah, it was definitely a more fun fight because we had a lot of striking, we had a lot of grappling, and it was only one round.
So, like you said, you kicked off the cage. Does that ever happen where like you surprise yourself with something you do in the moment? Like, because I know a lot of it is probably muscle memory. You kind of said you have almost like a progression of submissions you go to, but are you ever like, when you're in the moment, do you do things that surprise yourself and you go, like, man, I didn't think I was going to do that, but it just, like you said, it came naturally?
Yeah, there's times it's just instinct, right? And I've got, like, when it comes to grappling, like I've been grappling since I was 12, between wrestling and jiu-jitsu. So wrestling since I was 12, jiu-jitsu since I was 16. So like there's stuff like that just is in the back of my mind and I don't ever think about it. And then I'll just do it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I completely forgot about this. Like there's my ex MMA fight in New Orleans. I took it on a 2-week notice and I had a vacation. I was out with my kids in Orlando like a week before the fight. And there's a certain stand-up I did because he took me down and I hit this certain stand-up. We got back to our feet and he took me down, and then I finished him with the guillotine. And like I have never done that that particular stand-up where you grapevine the legs and then you get double butterflies. I haven't done that in like 4 or 5 years, and I've never done it in a fight. And for whatever reason, that fight, like, it just came to me. I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do this, and then I'll stand up, and we'll go back to striking. And so yeah, there's times like I definitely surprise myself, and like you're just kind of in the zone and you're not like thinking like what's next. The times when I've like thought what's next are actually the fights that I've done like the worst.
And speaking of your fights, your last fight was a boxing match, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah.
How is that compared to MMA, and what made you want to take the boxing match? And are you looking to get into boxing matches in the future?
So yeah, that's a funny story. So I was actually at the Wonder Boy fight, and I did all my medicals, and we were there because Wonder Boy was the main event. There was 10 fighters that were 55 and 45. And so, my management and Wonder Boy and all of us were like, hey, this is a really good opportunity, because if somebody falls out, Wonder Boy can say, hey, I'm the main event, put in my guy, he's already here with me, yada yada. So I was cutting weight, and I was like ready to fight on a dime's notice. Like even like I was cutting weight all the way through the night to the day of weigh-ins, and it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. It's like, okay, it's not not happening. So then I quit cutting weight because weigh-ins were at 9, and so I was like, there's no, I got down to like 150 or 152, and I was like, there's no way. And so nobody fell through, and so I didn't get a fight. Then I got a call from a promoter friend of mine, and he was like, hey, there's this boxing match against this kid. He's 11-1, but I think you can beat him for a boxing debut. And like I was depressed because I didn't get a fight, and I wanted to fight 5 times that year, and I only got to fight 4. And so I was like, what the heck, let's do it. That's fine. Like, I'm gonna do like some of the most gangster thing that's ever been done in South Carolina. Like, I'm gonna fight a legit 11-1 boxer. And I was like, I'll beat him. And they're like, okay, it's gonna be 6 rounds. And I was like, ooh, I don't know about 6 rounds. Like, I've been in Orlando, like kind of vacationing, but whatever. And so I also wanted to, because all my fights I can always go to the ground whenever I'm tired, because that's where I usually will rest, is on the ground. And I did it because there's 2 things. Like, mentally, I wanted to like prove to myself I can take a shot and I can like stand there and I don't have to like just go to the ground if I'm in trouble. and I wanted to go against like a legit guy who was a heavy hitter and things like that. And so the day of the boxing match, I was back spasms and nervous. My parents were telling me how stupid I was. Like, I'm like so close to getting to the UFC and all this other stuff, which, I mean, I don't know how close I am to getting to the UFC or not, but like, there's so much risk, and boxing's not your sport. And like, you're by far like, that's like the worst area of your fighting. I was like, it's fine. Like, I'm just going to go in there. I'm just going to have fun. And then like, I'm in the back, and every single person in the blue corner is lost. Like, they're all getting knocked out in the first 30 seconds. And I'm like, crap, like, what am I doing? Like, this is so stupid. And I'm like trying to like tell Coach T, I'm like, I don't want to fight. Like, my back's spasming. And he's like, nope, you're doing it. And I had Tony, Wonderboy's little brother, in my corner as well. And he's like, just go in there, man. Do you, like, you'll be fine. And so literally, like in the boxing match, I don't know if you guys have seen it. I've got the YouTube footage if you guys want to watch it. Literally, I'm just karate style, just like Wonderboy, hands down. I'm just like bouncing around and just hitting them with really long lefts and really long jabs. And for 6 minutes, I think I won the first 4 rounds, and I lost the last 2 just because I hadn't ever gone 6 rounds in anything. So, but it was fun. It was a lot. It was a great experience. And like at the end of the fight, I was like, okay, I won this. Like, there's no way I didn't win. He was all cut up. I had him cut here, I had him cut here, and I broke his nose. So I might box, like, if nothing's happening in MMA, I might box. Like, I think I have the build and I have the ability to go far in the sport. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's not a no.
Yeah. So we're running out of time, but just a couple more questions. I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about your aspirations in terms of what you want to do with your career. It seems like you would definitely like the opportunity to fight in the UFC. But can you talk a little bit more about some of the goals that you have personally?
Yeah. For me, it's like I've had offers like as a backup fighter for PFL and things like that, and I've just turned them down because for me it's the UFC or bust, because it's a goal I set out when I was a little kid. And my first time watching the UFC was in the 5th grade, and like, it was back when nobody knew what it was. And I if I do fight for anybody else, like, it's just more of a it takes away from the goal. And I want my kids to know, like, hey, you can do anything that you set your mind to. Like, it could be crazy, and everybody will tell you no, you can't make it. Like, when I first started, everyone told me I was dumb, there's no way. Back then, like, the church had a hard stance on it as well. Like, I got a lot of you know I got a lot of opposition from church leaders and things like that. And like, I've just stuck to my guns, and eventually I gained more and more respect from people, and more people have come to support me and believe in me. And so that's it. Like, that's the goal, is just to prove to or show my kids that you can do it, whatever you set your mind to, even if it's something as crazy as following a childhood dream that you had in the 5th grade.
That is awesome. We're definitely rooting for you to get there. But I want one thing you touched on that I want to just fit in here really quick before we're kicked off of here is I wanted to kind of talk about the stigma that fighting has, because Kellen and I are both members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and even within my own family, I'm not even a fighter, but my mom, like, anytime I'm watching a UFC fight near her or anything, she's like, should you really be watching that? Like, because it kind of has this stigma. But I know you've talked about this. I've seen quotes where you've kind of talked about this, but I just kind of want to hear your thoughts on, I guess, the stigma that fighting has and what you're trying to do to, I guess, break that stigma.
I think it's what's your intentions?
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing it because you enjoy violence, it's not the right thing. Your heart might not be in the right place. And we, we're taught that in the church a lot, is like, what's the intentions of your heart? And for me, it's I quote the 13th article of faith as we endure many things, we hope to endure all things. I'm just trying to endure many things, like that's what it's about.
Many fists.
Yeah, I like, and I really want to see how far I can push myself. And it's more of the competition aspect and less of the, hurting people and things like that. Like the first time I cut somebody up and I was covered in their blood, like part of you's like, oh man, it's so cool. And then the other part's like, oh, this is disgusting. Like I've got another person's blood on me and they're bleeding everywhere. And so like, I don't delight in that. And I could see like people like, and that's what I try to portray is like, for me, it's just a sport. It's just an opportunity for me to better myself as a man, better myself as a human being. It's not that I'm like glorifying the violence and the blood and guts. Like it's more of the, hey, I'm fulfilling, the law of the harvest. Like I'm gaining what I put into it.
For sure.
That's awesome. Well, Weston, we want to thank you for your time, and we want to wish you the best of luck in everything else you do. And just for our followers, can they look you up on, where can they find you on Instagram, or do you do social media?
Yeah, Westin Wilson is my Instagram, and I think you follow from there. You can get to my Facebook page too, but it's just at Westin Wilson, Westin. Yeah,
Perfect.
Yeah,
I want to hear the Harry Potter question.
Oh yeah, Brady.
Okay, I gotta fit it in this. It's a lot more basic than you answered before, but I was just curious. What's your favorite movie or book, if you have a preference, if you've read the books?
So my favorite's the fourth. I think the fourth is the coolest, and I think it's because of the competitor in me. Like the whole premise of the fourth is based around a competition, and so for me that was really cool. And that was like right before everything got really dark, because the book 5, 6, and 7 obviously are like all dark, and it's Voldemort's come back. Like that was like the loss of innocence. And so that's my favorite book. The competition and even the movie, like that's my favorite movie. Actually, I just built with my daughter a Lego set of the dragon and Harry doing Accio Firebolt and getting the golden egg. We just built that Lego set. So
Hungarian Horntail.
Yep. This is the Hungarian Horntail.
Yep.
And the
there you go. That is a solid answer. That's the correct answer in my opinion. But anyways, thank you so much, Weston. We really appreciate your time joining us here on Fan to Fan Combat.
Yeah. Thanks, Brady. Thanks, Kellen.